Hello, Dr. White here with your Module 5 brief introduction. With the last two modules, 3 and 4, we were working with an audience primarily of our discourse communities and or communities of practice. Ergo, we shared expert knowledge with that reader, and we were in a position of informing that reader. More precisely, and putting ourselves on the other end of that conversation, our reader had to read what we were writing as part of their professional and or scholarly responsibilities. So all of the work that we've done, both the annotated bibliography and the forms of writing analysis as well, have been geared towards an academic, scholarly, and maybe professional audience. I tried with the scholarly dialogue to force you to address shared concerns across areas of expertise within those communities. And again, I would kind of lump that as professional rather than scholarly. So, but at any rate, your audience for your first four has always been academic or professional. This changes with Module 5, the public document. I spent a few minutes there emphasizing that different audience, because what you have to realize is that the challenge of Module 5 is really different than the challenges of Modules 1 through 4. In Modules 1 through 4, your challenges primarily had to do with information gathering, processing, rephrasing, repackaging, critical thinking, extending what you've learned, thinking across different fields, and to an extent, thinking a little bit differently about published text than you're accustomed to. So all of these challenges have defined the work that you've done so far. That changes with Module 5 when you're doing public writing. So I'm going to right now go to the assignment sheet and unpack some key passages here. I've posted 2 sample projects under course materials, example texts, so do go ahead and read those, because those will give you a real look at what exactly we're looking to do here. And just to preemptively answer a question that I'm sure I'm going to get, you should be working on the same topic that you've already worked with. So the goal here, the challenge, is not to learn something new. It's to take what you are already doing and gear it to a different audience. Say that you were at Thanksgiving dinner and your uncle asked you about what you're doing in one of your classes. You obviously aren't going to explain a jargon-filled expert knowledge level to your uncle, who's kind of being polite, mostly, or at least that was my experience. You're going to want to make it interesting to them and want them to listen to you. So it's that same kind of challenge here, but of course in writing rather than in spoken word. So anyway, with this shift of audience, and I'm turning to the assignment sheet here, the real shift is that the previous documents that we worked with had to do with organizational obligation. I'm the reader for your forms of writing analysis. I need to read it because I'm your instructor and I need to give you a grade. With Module 3, the scholarly writing project, you're writing for a scholarly audience who's organizing a conference, and you need to demonstrate fluency in the jargon of the field. In their capacity as conference organizer and as expert in the subject matter that you are submitting on, they are obligated to read your writing. Similarly, with Module 4, those transcripts are not infrequently published, so someone might have to read that who wasn't able to go to your panel at a conference and hear your exchange. So they need to stay up to date with what's going on in their field, in their work, in their studies, so they have to read it. What this gets to is that a public reader, of course, doesn't. And here it might be helpful to think about your own public reading experiences. It could be fantasy football draft advice. It could be travel guides. It could be how to choose a college, how to apply to graduate school. It could be things that Kim Kardashian has done recently. It could be anything, really. But think about what makes you want to read on your own time and out of your own interest. Now, your challenge is to take your topic and your research and tailor it to a public reader who is not obliged to read your document. So part of this has one of the challenges that you're going to be confronted with here is how to make your topic interesting to the general public. Now, since we are all in the health professions here, we have an inherent advantage. Your readers are all human beings. As far as I know, there's no animal that can read and process information, nor do we have any concrete evidence yet of aliens. So your reader's a human being. So there's a certain vested interest that any reader has who shares the human biology. There's a shared concern there of, well, how to say not dying. So there is a little bit of a built-in advantage based on your subject matter, regardless of what exactly topic you're working with. But that said, of course, there are a lot of different ways that we might present this. And public writing about health, by the way, is some of the absolute best, most interesting, informative, dynamic public writing that exists. So I'm really excited to see what you're going to do, just off the cuff there. So there's a few ways it's helpful to start thinking about this. One, it's important to remember, and I'm looking at the third paragraph of the assignment sheet here, there is no such thing as like the general public. There are people who read the New York Times. There are people who read Time Magazine. There are people who read only Twitter. Hopefully not, but let's acknowledge there are. There are people who primarily consume news on via the Metro, the free newspaper they give out in public transit all over the country. So you always have different groups of publics, but there's really no like monolithic general public. That doesn't actually exist. It might be helpful to think about it in terms of shared interest. For instance, runners would be interested to read about orthopedics. You might think of it, so activities. You might think of it in terms of age. Obviously, elderly people might be interested in reading about maybe not. Okay. I was going to say aging. Maybe, teenagers, of course, young adults are interested in reading about what happens to your body as you get older. At what age does every Dunkin' Donuts, milkshake of a coffee thing start to give you a little bit of a belly? So there's all different ways that we might think about health. And of course, there's also questions of just public health, right? Members of the public who live in a place might want to know about shared concerns. It's summertime. West Nile virus is one in Massachusetts that comes up a little bit later on, for instance. So there's lots of different ways to think about audience for a piece like this, but it's helpful to think about what brings different groups of people together rather than assume there's like this general audience or general public that doesn't exist. So it's helpful to really anticipate who your readers are and what is going to define your readers. And I think shared interest is a good way to start with that. So once you kind of start to think about that a little bit, you can also think about some of the genre options that I've laid out for you in this assignment sheet. So for instance, a translation piece. It's a journalistic representation of a recent development within a field. You see this all the time on the news and in newspapers with treatments for cancer, ALS, diabetes, most of the things that you've all written about already. So you all have a tremendous technical proficiency and fluency in the jargon of your fields, but most people don't. So how do you explain how a new development works? That's your challenge. A profile, you might profile a star academic or other important person in a knowledge-related field. So again, a researcher at MGH has developed blah, blah, blah. Tell us who the researcher is. Where else has she worked? What else does she work on? Does she teach? What are the implications of this development? How does it fit into a larger body of work? Let's make people famous who deserve to be famous instead of Kanye. The op-ed, an argument developed for a broad public on an important issue. I know some of you are working on smoking cessation. Some of you are working on vaccines. Some of you are working on obesity. These are all great topics that lend themselves towards policy proposals and suggestions. So op-eds usually offer, hey, here's what we should do to address this problem of some public concern. the plan may not be the most detailed thing in the world, but it will relate to readers via case studies, prominent public examples, issues that have received mainstream media coverage. Take a position, defend it, support it with evidence. There's your op-ed. And of course, the campaign. You see this again with health all the time. Any of those pamphlets that they give in UHCS are examples of campaign pieces. Struggling with feeling good about yourself. Here are some support groups you can go to. See something, say something. Title IX campaigns. I mean, that's not strictly speaking health, but it's certainly related to health. So anytime that we want to inform someone about an issue, a campaign piece works well. So think about your topic with respect to audience, what might get an audience invested in your topic, and then which of those genres you might want to work from. The other requirements for this assignment that you probably care about, you need to have two versions: a final finished product that might be distributed somewhere on campus, in public, or online, and then an academic formal version that contains citation and follows MLA or APA style conventions. The goal of this, of course, remember, is it's a public document, so you're going to be relying on your research to provide expert level knowledge. I, as your instructor, am the audience for your formal academic cited version. I need to see where that knowledge is coming from. I need you to quote and cite liberally, and I need you to make sure that you're grounding this public document in academic, scholarly, professional level work. In contrast to that, public documents typically don't contain citation or footnotes. You will, of course, see in-text mentions all the time, so that may be appropriate depending on what you choose. If you do a campaign piece and you make a brochure, for instance, there may be like for further reading, but it's not the same level of rigor with citation or standards as is accepted by academic needs. So my capacity as an instructor for your course necessitates the formal academic cited version. My reader position as the reader of a public document means that you need to have a publishable designed version. So of course, how much designing and formatting goes into it depends on what you choose. If you want to do a multimedia project and post it online, that's awesome. And if you're interested in that, contact me. We can talk about some ways that you might, some approaches that you might take there. If you want to build a website, if you want to build a blog, if you want to do a Tumblr, if you want to make, use like Wix or something like that, that's cool. I'm open to that. But again, you would need to still have the formal academic version of a project there. So that's kind of one of the challenges here too, is that you actually have two submissions you're going to need to create. If you do have an intensely visual idea for a project, something with a lot of designs, an infographic, or like a video, a website, let me know. We might be able to come to an agreement on a reduced word count. Of course, you also need an author's note too here. So the author's note should come in with the academic version. It should be in that same file with the academic cited formal version. And the author's note needs to address the 4 bullet points in the assignment sheet. Basically, it's asking you to let me know that it's having you show me that you know where this might be distributed, how a reader might come into contact with it, what strategies you're using to engage and retain their interest, and you also, of course, need to define who your audience, who your readership is in the author's note. So one thing that you might find is the shorter your public document, like an informational brochure, if you're doing a campaign or something more photo or visually oriented, will necessitate a longer author's note because you're going to have to more fully describe the rhetorical situation into which you're entering. So you'll need to be really clear and say, this pamphlet on runner's knee would be distributed at local PT sites, running stores, and gyms. Specifically, we're going to target ones along the Boston Marathon course because these tend to be where these are clustered. And if you look at like Strava or Map My Run, it's obvious that 80% of the miles in Boston are logged on the Charles River and the marathon course. That might actually be true. So Ergo, this is where people are going to come into contact with it. So that's the kind of context that the author's note needs to add. I think that, again, reading it through on your own will give you a chance to think of some questions that you might need to ask for clarification. It's difficult for me right now to really anticipate like any and all points, and this video is getting a little long, so I'm just going to cut it momentarily. Any questions that I didn't address about Module 5 assignment sheet, please let me know. Please, please, please read both versions of both sample papers, because, again, doing that after you've read the assignment sheet should help clarify a lot of what I'm saying. Be in touch with anything else that you're wondering about, and you'll hear from me again later this week. Have a good one.